Hey everybody, it's Randy Ray at The Literate Texan with a reading event announcement. Most of you guys know that, well, most of the people who watch my channel know anyway, that I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. And every February we have an event called Holmes is Where the Heart Is. It's a Sherlock Holmes reading event. And it's a month-long event that happens in February. We do have prompts, although I don't know how seriously we take the prompts. I'm going to tell you what I'm doing with the prompts this year and explaining. But the event starts February 1st and ends at the end of February. You're encouraged to make videos. I have some great co-hosts for the event. I've got them written down here because my feeble mind doesn't remember things anymore. But my co-hosts for the event include Jim at Mystery and Mayhem, Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads, Mark at Book Time with Elvis, Bob at Occult Detective, and Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics. And so some of these guys are super familiar with the Sherlock Holmes canon and some are not. But let's talk about what canon means when it comes to Sherlock Holmes. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a total of 4 novels about Sherlock Holmes and 56 short stories. And those were collected in books. And the reason that we need to know what canon is so that you understand what the prompts are. Week 1 prompt is to read something from the long canon. And so the long canon are Sherlock Holmes novels. There's only 4 of them to choose from, okay? There's A Study in Scarlet, which was the first Sherlock Holmes novel, and The Sign of Four, or The Sign of the Four. Those are the first 2 Sherlock Holmes novels, and they came before the short stories. After those 2 novels came out, you had The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, each of which contained roughly a dozen short stories. And spoiler alert, Holmes does die at the end of The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, but public outcry was so big that he brought Holmes back for a novel called The Hound of the Baskervilles, which is really famous and would be considered part of the longer canon. And then he brought him back for some more short stories in The Return of Sherlock Holmes, which I am buddy reading with Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics. But I'm personally reading the entire canon again, all 56 stories and all 4 novels. And I plan to do that for the first 2 weeks of the month. So anyway, but I've got the books in order here. After Hound of the Baskervilles, there's The Return of Sherlock Holmes. And then there was another novel, the final of the 4 novels, Valley of Fear, which is almost unanimously considered the least of the novels. His Last Bow is the penultimate, the next to the last Sherlock Holmes collection of short stories. And then the Case Book of Sherlock Holmes was the last collection of short stories. And so the Sherlock Holmes canon began in 1887 with the publication of A Study in Scarlet and ended in 1920. Is that a 4 or a 9? I think that's a 9. No, it's a 7. 1927 with the Case Book of Sherlock Holmes. So most people agree that after Sherlock Holmes dies and returns, he's never quite the same. It's not quite as good. Although I really like a lot of the stories in The Return of Sherlock Holmes. Okay, so those are your canonical pieces. Week 1, read one of the novels. Week 2, you can read one of the short stories or one of the short story collections. I'm going to read the canon in order, which means I'm going to read A Study in Scarlet, Sign of the Four, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, Hound of the Baskervilles, The Return of Sherlock Holmes, Valley of Fear, His Last Bow, and the Case Book of Sherlock Holmes. In that order. That's what I'm reading. But I'm a fast reader and I'm also obsessive compulsive, especially when it comes to Sherlock Holmes. Okay, so the prompts for week 3 and 4 are a little different. Week 3, the prompt is to read the Sherlock Holmes pastiche. And there's plenty of these. And I've got some examples here to show you. Of course, they're in a really awkward position, so I have to lean forward into the camera like that. One of these is called The Return of Moriarty by John Gardner. John Gardner, the mystery writer, not the literary guy who wrote Grendel. But The Napoleon of Crime Returns, proving you can't keep a bad man down. I love that cover blurb there. This is really good from what I remember. I haven't read it in years, but I'm looking forward to reading it again. Obviously, it's not part of the canon because it wasn't written by Conan Doyle or approved as part of the canon. Here's another example. This is called Shadows Over Baker Street. This is a collection of short stories about Sherlock Holmes that combine him with the Cthulhu mythos sensibility of H.P. Lovecraft. And being topical enough, the first story in here is called A Study in Emerald by Neil Gaiman, which, I know Neil Gaiman is controversial right now, but it's one of the best Sherlock Holmes pastiches that I've ever read. Certainly the best one to combine Sherlock Holmes with anything supernatural. And then I've got The Exploits of Sherlock Holmes here, which is about as close to being canonical as a pastiche will get. It's written by Adrian Conan Doyle and John Dickson Carr. Adrian Conan Doyle, I believe, I think he's Arthur Conan Doyle's son, but I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, he was the youngest son of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And then, of course, John Dickson Carr is a famous mystery writer. He's most famous for his locked door mysteries. This is, by the way, this is the edition of Sherlock Holmes that I'll be reading. I have the complete works here from Doubleday, and I don't have and that's the first volume, and then I've got the second volume here, which is a little bit thicker. All total, there's 1,120 pages in the canon in this edition, but there's also an essay called In Memoriam at the beginning of the first volume, which I believe was written by Christopher Morley. Yeah, and it's a pretty famous essay. Week 3, of course, is for pastiche. We're doing a group read too, and I don't have it handy where I can grab it and show it to you, but I'm sure it's been mentioned in all the other videos, and I'll be making more videos about this event than just this one, so you'll hear about it some more too. And then week 4 is dedicated to nonfiction about Sherlock Holmes or about Arthur Conan Doyle. I'm going to stretch the limits of that a little bit. I've got a collection here. It's uncollected stories by Arthur Conan Doyle, and most of them are spooky stories, ghost stories and tales of the odd and the weird and stuff. And I'm going to consider that nonfiction since it's a collection of short stories that were not previously collected, but that's really, really stretching the boundaries, I know. If I can find a good nonfiction book about Sherlock Holmes, I might read it too. I have a copy of The Dummy's Guide to Sherlock Holmes around here somewhere. I've also got a copy of Michael Dirda's book about Conan Doyle, which was also really good, but I don't know that I'm ready to reread it again. But I will find some kind of nonfiction about Conan Doyle to read. But anyway, that's it. That's my announcement for this year's Sherlock Holmes reading event. I will probably make several videos for this because I absolutely love Sherlock Holmes. Rereading Sherlock Holmes makes me feel like a kid again. If you've never read them before, maybe they'll make you feel like a kid for the first time. I don't know. But I've got more videos coming soon, but I definitely wanted to get this announcement out there about the Sherlock Holmes reading event. Until my next video, I want you to stay hydrated. It's really important. And stay sexy, folks.